Not on Sunday, but rather Saturday this time around. Another weekly is dropped, and judging by the large patch notes in this update compared to other weeklies, there's a lot to break down, so I'm going to keep this introduction short. A lot of cards have changed with this patch, especially cards that needed a change, and there's a new card in play on top of that. Boosted rates have been moved from Path of Fire to Snowville, so if you haven't bothered to get a full set of Wind Powered and Freezer Burn, this is a very good time to bother to get it. With that out of the way, let's get into the meat of the changelogs. First on the docket is the Overseer. Its shop got a full revamp out of nowhere, which is going to be a huge win for newer players. Instead of a few bundles, Overseer now sells most event cards. He didn't get breakup, while retaining his comically overpriced cosmetics. The common event cards cost 10 nether tokens. Rares cost 25 with the exception of the Snowville Champion cards and Mending Heart, which cost 30. Ultras are 50 each, and Legendaries are 100. Resolute Blade, however, is priced at 400, but honestly, I find it funny, so it gets a pass. Of course, this big of a change doesn't come without its shortcomings, and that's the lack of breakup at the shop. It's not a huge issue, however, it being the premier counter to the Nicole Rin fight, and it being locked to Love and Pain has always been a little confusing to me. Again, it's not a huge enough issue to be grounds for a suggestion, but if there's ever a larger presence of charm in permanent fights, that could change. People who have seen other content on my channel know that I view Agonized Greed and Demon Lore as the gods of deck consistency, so them being available year-round at this fair of a price is going to be a huge assist for deck building. This is a great addition for Hexaria. Good job. Second, the enemy balancing changes. Vizio having the gimmick of stun, with the only check being rally, was oppressive, with the biggest offender being Discharge, a 3-cost card that deals a bit of damage and then applies a 2-turn stun to all enemies in a 2 AoE radius of the caster. Due to how Vizio's deck contains a lot of different cards, Discharge tends to come out of nowhere and stun half of your team, or even all of your team, leaving your party open to getting ravaged by Vizio and the other Electromancer enemies in the fight. In this weekly patch, Discharge stun duration has been lowered to 1 turn, making it less of a threat in the fight that will lose you the game if you're unlucky afterwards. It puts the fight slightly more into the player's hands, which is good for the Vizio fight. The other enemy change this weekly patch is none other than a slight Elite Mage deck adjustment. Elite Mage has Dazzle now. There's not really much to say about this change, it just makes them a little bit more unpredictable when fighting them. I thought I'd mention that Dazzle doesn't show up in the Bestiary after rerolling their deck a lot of times, so that probably needs to be fixed. Next, the balancing changes, and oh boy, were there a lot of them. Starting off with the biggest one of the bunch. Hired Wizard has been in this weird place where it's this jack-of-all-trades support that has no consistency whatsoever. Arcovian trainees, on the other hand, have a clear gimmick of a defensive support, and you can see why they're fairly used by players. This got changed in the weekly patch, as Hired Wizard got a crucial rework that moved it over to a more offensive support unit. Its deck is now much more consistent, made up of 4 cards. Attack buff, defense debuff, a newly buffed Armor Breaker, and a new card called Multi-Wand, which combines the effects of Wand Zap and Wand Heal. If it's used on an ally, then it heals them. If it's used on an enemy, then it does the effects of Wand Zap. However, the attack damage is now life loss damage. The card's targeting is now the overall lowest health percentage within range, which means it's way more consistent than before. You can reasonably predict how it's going to use Multi-Wand. Hired Wizard also got a health buff to 30 health, which allows it to stay on the field a little bit longer than before. I thought I'd also mention that Armor Breaker now has minimum range, which means Hired Wizard will more commonly stay at a safe distance now, another buff to its longevity. You're getting your bits well spent unlike before, and Staff of Azure now has proper competition. This was a good rework for Hired Wizard. Looking at the patch notes, you could probably guess which of the cards were randomized changes and which ones were meaningful changes. I think it's pretty obvious that Fire Breath is one of the former, however, there's still a little bit to bring up. Its burn duration being increased from 3 to 4 allows it to somewhat keep up with other high-cost burn powerhouses like Swelters, so, cool. Next up, Unstable Weakness. After the redemption of Destructive Chant, Unstable Weakness became the undisputed worst card in the game. From its initial suggestion to its release, you could obviously see the potential balancing that took place. These shortcomings were noted and have finally been corrected during this weekly patch. Its energy amount, modifier potency, and modifier duration have all gotten elevated. It now shuffles 7 energy, above the baseline for 2-cost energy cards. Its attack down potency has also been doubled alongside a duration confusion increase of 1, allowing it to be a key debuffer in the unstable energy archetype. Don't worry, the throne of the worst card in the game hasn't been completely vacated. Unless Tower Shield Slam gets a meaningful rework by the end of June, you can expect it to take the throne of the worst card in the game. If you're at this point in the video, I just want to say thanks for watching. If you like the content, then feel free to leave a like on the video so more people can see it. If you want to keep up with new content on the channel, feel free to subscribe. It also motivates me to get some more content done. And now we're on to Catalyst. Previously, Catalyst had the issue of potentially wasting some of your poison stacks if you rolled the Confusion or Heal Block effect multiple times. However, this is no longer an issue after the weekly patch. Confusion and Heal Block can no longer be rolled more than once when using Catalyst. This puts a greater emphasis on the effects which will amp up Rotten Claw, such as the negative modifiers and Decay. Players are going to be getting more consistent value out of Catalyst now, and that's great for the poison archetype. Everfrost Chunk had the nerf coming due to a multitude of reasons, with the biggest one being the arrival of Wind Powered. You could use Wind Powered and then get the conditional off Everfrost Chunk more or less for free, and the card was a little too good. Its conditional now only activates upon Self-Burn or Frostbite. However, I find Everfrost Chunk to still be in a good spot. Astute players will find that there's still multiple options to nab the conditional for the card. You still have Hot Sauce and Hot Hands available for reliable enablers. However, unlike Wind Powered, you now have to take some recoil damage for the best enablers, which is why I find the card to be fair in its new state. Moving on to the Cupid's Arrow change, more or less an hour after dropping a Masterclass and Mediocrity video on the card, it got changed in the weekly. It's now 4 bits, and its damage has been increased to 55. This elevates the card a lot, and I think Ignis said it the best. It's a legendary card which has had balancing issues for years due to how Charm was the poster child for a big potential effect. Messing with its Charm could break the card wide open, so its damage and cost have been adjusted to make the card more palatable for general use. Spending 4 bits is better than spending 5, and the card now has respectable damage for the cost. It's not going to make Cupid's Arrow the menace it was before the Charm change, but it's out of the gutter, and that's what matters. Snowville Slumber got a slight buff to its Frostbite potency up to 10 from 8. While the card's typically used for the 5-turn Confusion effect, it can now be a little more relevant for the Frostbite effect. It'll still be used more for the Confusion effect probably, but at least it's a little more palatable for Icy Sigil use now. Brain Freeze got buffed, so now I have to cover this card in analysis videos. Its Glaciate amount has been lowered from 3 to 2 as it was before. 3 cards getting glaciated was a tempo breaker, as it almost always glaciated all the cards you were going to use the bits for in the first place. And taking 3 turns to unglaciate all the cards wasn't worth it for a single bit. Only glaciating 2 is fair, as you'd still have to thaw the 2 frozen cards out, but you're very likely going to have at least 1 card in your hand you can use the bit for. Wind Powered was released with Void still on it, as the Thinkers wanted a suspect test it before deciding to remove Void off it. Unsurprisingly, after a week of it being in players' hands, it was decided that Wind Powered should get unvoided. It's sort of like Arms Race, where the downside is primarily a test of skill. With Arms Race, you need to manage your bit cap so you don't bit leak. With Wind Powered, you need to manage your positioning so your enemies don't go out of range. Another good change in the bit gain department. More or less the only time you'd ever see Perish be used in a deck is in the event of players stratting Birdman, so they could make their whole personality around having the Birdman title. Perish being a primarily damage card in the poison archetype was confusing, as you already had many established damage options in the archetype like Disease Dagger and Venom Shank, which don't require as much setup for as much of a mediocre payout like Perish does. Now, Perish has a damage cap of 48, but if you reach the cap, it now also applies a 6 damage poison for 6 turns to the target. Poison stacks above the 8 required to reach the cap add 6 more damage to the poison effect. This allows Perish to keep the damage scaling gimmick while also rewarding stacking poison over the cap by adding more stacks of poison into the mix. This is a win for the poison archetype. Obliged Offer got a slight but still noticeable buff, increasing its scaling per burn stack from 8 to 9. It's decent competition for Soothing Flame, Spicy Concoction, and Cauterize, but I still think that Cauterize and Soothing Flame are the generally better options for burn heals due to their low cost and consistent payout. It's a nothing burger change, but that's going to frequently happen with randomized balancing changes. After hearing about the upcoming Insane Bolt buff before the weekly patch, I was worried that it would be handled poorly. There were really 3 scenarios that the buff could result in. The best case scenario was the bit cost going from 4 to 3. The middle of the pack scenario was the damage being amped up. The worst case scenario was a stun conditional that wouldn't do much for the card. Fortunately, the best case scenario happened and the card's cost went from 4 to 3. So, Insane Bolt got buffed. But how insane is this buff really? Well, it's no longer on the level of Explosion on power level. It properly matches what we've seen with Static Discharge and Unstable Bolt. It's an AoE scimitar, but you run the risk of taking recoil. This is going to help out Insane Bolt become the funny content card it's always wanted to be.
It's time for the funny content. It's time for the funny content.
If I get recoil, you can do it with the analog fix for me.
Before we get into the new card, I thought I'd go over some of the changes which aren't as important. Ember has been moved over from the Blazing Inferno card pack to the Mystic Wisdom card pack. This will help with getting the resources for the Eternal Flame trade-in and player progression as a whole. Lastly, previous cards which have had placeholder icons have gotten proper card arts. They look good, not much else to say about them. And finally, we arrive at the new card. After a discussion in Hexaria a few days ago, Burning Boost was brought up as it was one of Lights' first ideas, and now it's in the game. My opinion on the card is mixed, and here's why. For 1 bit, you can apply a 30% attack buff to yourself. If the caster is burning, the buff is repeated. However, if the caster has Eternal Burn on themselves, they also gain a 5 potency regen for 5 turns. It's a multi-purpose card that you're not going to be aiming for both conditionals, which I like. It helps out self-burn decks while also being a good card for the semi-existent Eternal Flame archetype. Hyper-offensive E-Flame is something I've wanted for a long time, and Burning Boost sort of fits the bill as a buffing card. On Eternal Burn, you get a decent attack buff for the claws and some chip regen. Simple. For Burn, it's a little more nuanced, because there's already options there. Self-Burn already has multiple setup cards in Hot Sauce, Firepower, and the much more risky Flame Body. The way I see Burning Boost being used in self-burn decks is based on the attacks you're using. If you're running something like Burn 2, where you're using a lot of attacks quickly, then you'd want to use Firepower over Burning Boost, since you're not forced to use a high damage attack right after setting up. If you're running something more heavy hitting like a deck centralized around Burst Flare, then you're probably going to want to use Burning Boost instead, as attack buffs almost always don't go away unless you consume them with an attack. It provides a little more customizability with burn decks, and that's a good thing. I think it's a neat addition. You can get Burning Boost from the Blazing Inferno card pack, so get ready to potentially lose a lot of gold to get a full set of them. I thought I'd use the last section to also reflect upon the previous weekly patch as well, since last week had a lot of changes for the game, and some time has passed to digest the adjustments. I mentioned how Reckless Frenzy last week seemed to get nerfed, but it looks more like a rework now, or even a buff if anything. Frail doesn't increase incoming damage by 1 per stack, it's just the first stack that matters for the base damage increase. Reckless is still going to be prominent based on what I'm seeing. However, players will need to be more careful against enemies that prefer effects over attacks now. If you don't believe me, look at the recent Cupid's Arrow video. I literally ran Reckless Frenzy in a silly Shoddy Dagger cycle deck there. Manage the downside and you'll see almost no difference compared to the previous iteration. Second, the ramifications for the previously underperforming Frostbite archetype. Hell has frozen over and Zai has made a Frostbite deck. While getting footage for the video, me and some others decided to try out a Frostbite deck in Dark Isles, and you can really see the previous faults of Frostbite being patched up from last week. Freezer Burn is a reliable damage card for the archetype when enemies refuse to move. Ice Bolt is a good damage option when you have Frostbite and Freeze setup, and Icy Shard is the quick play Frostbite card the archetype needed badly, that also removes debuffs from the caster. It's great when your whole team runs it, that's a given, but you also have the tools to find good value from it when running Frostbite alone. Overall, it's safe to say the changes from last week have been productive for deck building. Going back to this week, lots of fundamentally bad cards have been elevated to where they should have been. Unstable Weakness, Cupid's Arrow, Hired Wizard, and Insane Bolt are out of the gutter, which have been changes that have been wanted for a while now, and the devs have finally followed through this week. It's a good patch, and I hope some other frauds like Call Guard and Chain Reaction can be looked into soon for weeklies. See ya.